Sew a boot out of sealskin that will not let in a single drop of water. No glue, no rubber, no synthetic thread. And here is the part that stops people. The needle never goes all the way through the hide. The stitch runs inside the thickness of the skin and comes back out the same side it went in. Miss once and you have a wet foot in air cold enough to take the toes off it before you get home. That is one technique, from one people, and it is not even close to the most impressive thing they knew. There was never one Native American way of staying alive. There were hundreds of nations living on sea ice, in deserts, in boreal forest, on grass that ran unbroken for 1,000 miles, and their methods have almost nothing in common with each other, because their problems didn't either. What they share is the level of engineering. And to see it, you have to start with the thing you think you already understand. Rubbing two sticks together. That phrase has done more damage to people's idea of intelligence than almost anything else. The motion is not the skill. The wood is. In Chiricahua Apache country, in what is now southern Arizona and New Mexico, the working piece was often the dried flower stalk of a sotol or yucca, a plant that throws up a tall stalk, sets seed, and dies, leaving behind a length of wood that is light, dead dry and soft in a very particular way. Spun against a hearth of the same soft wood, the friction shaves off a powder, and the powder piles up and holds heat until it becomes a coal. Try the same motion with oak or green pine, and you will grind your palms open and get a black smear and nothing else. But the real technique was not kneading it. Fire was carried, banked in slow-burning material, and kept alive across a move. Starting from nothing was the emergency method. You are impressed by the hard version. They organized their lives so the hard version almost never came up. Now go south into the Sonoran Desert, Tohono O'odham country, where summer ground temperature can cook an egg, and there is no surface water for days in any direction. Everyone has seen the movie where a man cuts open a barrel cactus and drinks. That is not a water source. The fluid inside most barrel cactus is alkaline and full of compounds that will make you vomit, and vomiting in that heat is how the desert finishes you. The water was in the terrain. Rain there does not soak in evenly. It runs off rock and collects in basins scoured into stone, tinajas, some shaded deep enough to hold water for weeks after the last storm. The technique was memory. Knowing where dozens of them sat, which ones filled first, which went dry first, and in what order to walk them so that you were never more than one leg of travel from the next. And in June, when the saguaro fruit ripens high above your head, it came down with a long pole made of saguaro ribs, and it was boiled to syrup and stored. There is a ceremony tied to that harvest, held to call the summer rains. It is still held. North to the plains, Lakota and Niitsitapi country in the 16th to 19th centuries, the romantic line is that they ate what they killed. What they actually did was solve food storage without salt, smoke, or cold. Lean meat, cut thin and dried until it snaps, then pounded into loose fiber. Rendered fat, melted and poured over it in roughly equal weight, sometimes with dried choke cherries crushed in whole, pits and all. Sealed in a hide bag, it kept for years without spoiling. Pound for pound, it carries several times the energy of fresh meat, needs no cooking, no fire, no preparation of any kind. You can eat it walking. The fur trade later ran on the stuff because nothing the Europeans had came close. Hold that thought about food and what is missing from it. It is going to matter later, when a disease that killed more European sailors than every naval battle of the age walks into this story and gets cured in a week. Go far north now, Inuit country, the Canadian Arctic, and Greenland. Warm clothing is not the achievement. Anyone can be warm standing still. The achievement is being warm while working hard, in cold that turns sweat into a death sentence. Caribou hair is hollow. Each strand is a sealed tube of air, which is why caribou hide insulates far past its weight. The system was two separate garments. Inner layer, fur turned in against the skin. Outer layer, fur turned out. Between them, an air gap. Both cut loose, deliberately, so that moisture from your body moves out through the layers instead of soaking them, and so you can pull an arm inside to warm it. Overheat, and you open the neck and vent the same way you'd unzip a jacket, except getting it wrong costs more than comfort, and the thread was sinew, split from the back or leg of the animal. Sinew swells when it takes on moisture. So on a sealskin boot, the seamstress runs that blind stitch inside the layer of the hide, never piercing through to the far side, and the thread inside the seam expands and closes it tighter. The boot does not leak because the seam was designed not to be a hole in the first place. That is one woman's hands, one bone needle, and a system that a modern factory copies with adhesive and plastic. Shelter, same country. The snow house, the Igloo Vjak, is not an emergency shelter. It is a piece of thermal design. The blocks are cut from a single wind-packed drift, tested by feel for the right density, and set in a rising spiral so the dome closes on itself under its own compression. The entrance tunnel drops below the floor level because cold air sinks and stays trapped down there and cannot climb into the living space. The sleeping platform is built high, where the warm air collects. A seal oil lamp and a few bodies bring the inside up by tens of degrees, and the inner surface glazes to ice, which seals the wind out completely. You are inside a structure made of the thing that is trying to kill you, and it is the reason you live through the night. Then there is finding your way home. In a whiteout there are no stars. In deep winter there is no sun, and a magnetic compass near the pole is close to useless. So the map is the ground. The prevailing wind in a given region blows from a consistent direction, and where it crosses a drift, it carves the snow into hard, tapered ridges. Inuit knowledge names these forms precisely, the Ukalurate among them, shaped like a tongue, always oriented the same way relative to that wind. You read them by eye when you can see, and through the soles of your boots or the drag of the sled when you cannot. Elders interviewed in living memory could hold whole regions of these features in their heads, not landmarks. Snow, which reforms after every storm, in the same orientation and can be trusted. Into the forest Anishinaabe country around the Great Lakes, the birch bark canoe looks simple to a modern eye, which tells you how badly a modern eye reads it. The bark comes off a big paper birch in spring, ideally in one sheet without killing the tree. The hull is built from the outside in, bark first, cedar ribs, and sheathing forced in afterward so the wood presses the skin tight from the inside. The seams are stitched with wotap, spruce root split fine, and sealed with spruce gum cooked with fat and charcoal to a mix that stays slightly flexible instead of cracking cold. When it does crack, you warm it and reseal it on the riverbank in minutes. The result carries a load many times its own weight and can be lifted onto one person's shoulders and walked to the next river. There is no material in your house that would let you build one. Back to the plains for scale. Head smashed in Niitsitapi territory in what is now southern Alberta, is a cliff with a drive system running back from it. Lines of stone cairns stretching for miles across the prairie, built and maintained across generations to shape how a herd moved through the country. Archaeology puts the site in use for close to 6,000 years, with a bone bed beneath the cliff many meters deep. Sit with the timeline, not a hunt. A permanent installation in the landscape, older than the pyramids, worked and rebuilt by people who inherited it from people who inherited it. Everything downstream of it, the drying racks, the fat, the winter stores, depended on knowing the animal's habits well enough to write that knowledge into the ground itself, and they were not the only ones editing the landscape. Hold that. Winter of 1535 into 1536, on the St. Lawrence, at the town of Stadacona. Jacques Cartier's crews are frozen in. Scurvy takes hold, and around 25 of his men die. Their gums rot, old wounds reopen, they cannot stand. Europe will not understand this disease for another 2 centuries. A Stadaconan man named Domagaya shows them a preparation made from a local tree, bark and needles steeped and drunk. The crews recover in days. The exact species is still argued over. White cedar is the usual candidate, but it is not settled. What is not in doubt is who had the answer. A people the newcomers described as savages handed a European expedition the cure for the disease that would go on killing sailors by the tens of thousands. Which brings us to the last one, and it is the one nobody counts as survival. Colonists arriving in California described open oak country you could ride through, grass under the trees, no choking brush. They took it for untouched wilderness. It was maintained. Along the Klamath River, Karuk and Yurok people burned the land deliberately on a cycle. Low, cool fires set at the right season and the right moisture, clearing understory, killing pests in the acorn crop, bringing up the straight new shoots needed for basketry, opening browse that pulled the elk and deer in. Those oaks were a food system. Tarnuac acorns were gathered by the hundreds of pounds, cracked, ground, and then leached. The flour spread in a basin of clean sand with water poured through it again and again until the bitterness was gone, and what remained was storable starch that could carry a family through winter. A century of fire suppression turned that country into fuel, and the fires it produces now are not the ones those people set. Cultural burning is still practiced, and California law has begun recently to make room for it again. None of this was secret knowledge. That is the part worth sitting with. The woman placing that blind stitch was not a specialist. The man reading snow ridges through his boots was not a navigator by trade. A child of 7 in any of these worlds knew which wood took a coal, which basin held water into July, which oak dropped the good acorns, and what happened to people who guessed. You know how to do one thing, probably, and a machine helps you do it.